Hey, what's up guys, Tech9 here and I'm back again with a brand new video. So before I begin, I just want to thank you all so much for the incredible support that you guys have been showing the channel. I do greatly appreciate anybody who's watching, and if you're new to the channel, don't be a stranger. Go ahead and leave a thumbs up. Also make sure you subscribe if you haven't already done so. So with that being said, I'm making this comparison to kind of showcase the two of the phones that fall under the $200 price range, and they're just such incredible phones for the money that you would be paying for them brand new. So we're going to be looking at the Galaxy A16 5G versus the Moto G 5G. Now mind you that the Moto G 5G is still the 2024 model, or you can say like the 2023-2024 model, and the A16 is the 2024-2025 model of Galaxy's A lineup of phones. So one of the things that I want to look at here when it comes to this topic comparison is the design, the camera quality, the differences in camera, the display of course, the performance, and kind of give it a solid conclusion to see which one would fit you best. So let's go ahead and get started, and we're going to talk about the design of both of these phones. So both the Moto G 5G and the Samsung Galaxy A16 kind of take different approaches when it comes to design, different material, different way that the phone feels, kind of different looks. So if we put these phones side by side and look at the right hand side of the phones, you will see that they both gotta place the power button / fingerprint sensor on the right hand side with your volume up and down. Now the A16 does have this kind of indentation that leads towards the power button and your volume up and down. I guess that gives it a sort of a unique look, which they did do on the Galaxy A15 from the previous generation. Now both of these buttons are fairly tactile. I do like to say that the Galaxy A16 has a slightly less tactile power button versus the Moto G 5G. And if we look at the bottom, here's a big difference that you will notice. The A16 ditches the headphone jack that a lot of the Galaxy A lineup had, and the Moto G 5G 2024 model still has or will still retain the headphone jack. And you still got the USB-C on the bottom. Now as far as the material of choice, the Moto G 5G does use this kind of vegan leather material versus the glossy finish of the Galaxy A16 that when you shine it under sunlight condition, it sort of gives you this kind of diamond pattern that from a distance looks cool, but I do have to say that the actual look and feel of the Moto G 5G is a little bit more solid, less fingerprints, and just feels more grippy in the hand itself. And I do have to say that when it comes to things like dust and things like that, the Galaxy A16 is easier to clean because once dust and lint and things like that hit the Moto G 5G, it makes it a little bit harder to clean. Even when you look at the camera designs though, the Moto G 5G cleanly kind of wraps the vegan leather material around the camera housing versus the classic Samsung's triple camera setup where each camera has its own kind of round lens to it. And I do have to say that in my personal opinion, I enjoy the design a little bit better of the Moto G 5G. I think it looks more premium and it's more modern than the Galaxy A16's design. So that's just my personal preference, and I feel like I'm just not really a big fan of the glossy material. So if we look at it from a design perspective, which again, it's kind of a subjective topic. One, they do get rid of the headphone jack on the A16. I don't know how you would feel about that. But two, the material choice on the Moto G 5G is just a better option. So I do have to give the design slight edge to the Moto G 5G. Now, if we switch to the display department, here's where you will really notice a massive difference. So the 2024 Moto G 5G gives us a 6.6-inch 720p display, or they call it HD plus, but it is a 720p IPS panel that, I mean, I get that it supports 120 hertz, but what's the use of 120 hertz if you give us a low quality display? Now don't get me wrong, the IPS panel is kind of good, but it's just 720p, really? I don't know. On the other hand, you get a massive upgrade on the display department when it comes to the Galaxy A16. So the Samsung Galaxy A16 gives us a 6.7-inch, so slightly larger, 1080p, Super AMOLED display, really bright 800 nits. It might not have quite 120Hz refresh rate. It does, however, have a 90Hz refresh rate. And if we look at the kind of screen to body ratio, I do have to say that the bezels on the Moto G 5G are slightly smaller, but I'll take slightly larger bezels if we're going to get a better quality display. So when it comes to your kind of everyday task, watching videos, things like that, there's no brainer. The Moto G 5G just lacks the display. Now, I've also read a report on the 2025 Moto G5G that they will be releasing here in the next couple of months, that it may still retain the 720p display. I hope that these reports are not true, because if we still get 720p on a phone that I feel like with Motorola's kind of budget should be getting 1080p, I would sacrifice the 90Hz or the 120Hz refresh rate for a 1080p display. I would actually do it. I don't mind it being IPS. It's just 720p in this day and age, I feel like, is just unacceptable coming from a company like Motorola. So yeah, I mean, the display department, like I said, no brainer. The Galaxy A16 just stomps and just destroys the Moto G5G's display, from getting a Super AMOLED to a higher, brighter screen, and just gives you pretty much almost the whole deal when it comes to a quality display for a phone that costs under 200 bucks. So I want to switch the topic of discussion and talk a little bit about the camera experience when it comes to both of these devices. So both the Moto G5G and the Samsung Galaxy A16 have a main sensor of 50 megapixels. However, the Galaxy A16 does have an ultra-wide sensor that is missing on the Moto G5G. Both shoot 1080p, and again, however, the A16 does have gyro electronic image stabilization when it comes to shooting video. But when it comes to the user experience, the Moto G5G has a pretty solid, pretty quick user experience, just what you would expect, honestly, from Motorola. The focusing system could use a little bit of work, but I mean, if you actually can get the phone to focus in decent daylight conditions, you can get some alright shots, to be honest with you. That's just all your expectations when it comes to these types of devices. So you'll get decent shots. They're not going to be the best that you'll ever see, not the best dynamic range, not the most color accurate pictures, but they're okay. Similar story to the Galaxy A16. Again, a solid camera experience, takes pictures really quickly. I do have to say that transitioning between the main sensor and the wide angle on the Galaxy A16 is slightly delayed, but it's alright. Picture quality is ever so slightly better, and I have to say that I will give the edge to the Galaxy A16 just because it does give us the extra ultra-wide sensor. Even though it is low resolution, it still is a actual sensor that you can use versus a macro sensor that you probably will never use. Slightly better color calibration on the Galaxy A16, but overall though, honestly, picture quality on both of these devices are kind of similar. So you wouldn't go, I would not jump the gun and buy one phone over the other just for the camera experience. So keep that in mind. Okay, so when it comes to the performance of both of these devices, I do have to say when it comes to the actual chipset that they use, so the Galaxy A16 uses the Exynos 1330. This is the model that I have. I know there's going to be a model where it will use the MediaTek Dimensity processor, but I'm just reviewing the one that I have. Versus the Moto G5G's Snapdragon 4 Gen 1 processor based on a 6nm architecture. Now, the reason I would give the slight edge to the A16 is not because of the CPU performance, because I would say they're very similar. The Galaxy A16 does have higher benchmark scores, but honestly, when it comes to actually using these phones and kind of testing the CPU in real life, I didn't really find big differences there. However, the Galaxy A16 does give us the option to go to up to 8GB of RAM, which is the model that I have with me, and it does still cost 200 bucks, which is amazing. And the Moto G5G maxes out at 4GB of RAM, 128GB of storage. So for those reasons, I will give the slight edge in performance to the Galaxy A16. But from a CPU perspective, they're very similar. But overall though, here's my kind of solid conclusion that I want to give you guys. I do have to, again, if I were to buy one or the other, I would go for the Galaxy A16. One, it does give me a better display, an ever so slightly better camera, and ever so slightly better performance. The battery life on both of these devices are actually very similar, and I do prefer the design of the Moto G5G, but design is just not everything, unfortunately, for it. If it did have a 1080p display, even if it was IPS, I may be leaning towards it a little bit more, but just because of its lackluster display, and I guess, yeah, the display really killed this phone. Hopefully in the next generation we really don't get a 720p display. But with that being said, I mean, leave it in the comments below. Do you think that you would buy the A16 over the Moto G5G, or do you feel like the design is just more compelling on the Moto G5G, or you'd be willing to sacrifice display quality? Let me know in the comments below. I would really like to have a conversation about that with you guys. So with that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and I will definitely catch you guys in the next one.